there's about 50 effect shots in the film that you wouldn't necessarily even think of. I mean, even kind of little things like, for instance, I think Abigail walks into a bathroom and she gets a phone call and she looks down at her phone, but we hadn't shot the insert of the phone, so we had to get a photograph of the floor, which was what she was looking at, and then we blew that up into a little picture, and then it was Jasmine, my wife's hand, who was holding the phone and doing the scroll. But that could be classed as almost like an effect shot. And then there were the obvious ones, which were the wires coming out of the hand, and when we're in the desert and we see the ruins, they were like old school Terry Gilliam style matte paintings and stuff, But I think it keeps the movie bubbling. There's quite a lot of stuff going on in the film, and constantly. It's nothing huge and over the top, but it's always there. I mean, a lot more than a movie like Halloween, a hell of a lot more. And even I've seen a lot of horror films, we have little effect shots happening all the time. Even establishing shots of buildings and so forth are kind of effect shots. So, yeah, there's a lot. But it keeps the movie going the whole time. It's always on the simmer. I like the idea of opening the movie in the desert in an exotic location, but obviously we couldn't travel there. So we went 2 hours north of Sydney to a place called Anna Bay, and that had sort of Arabian kind of dunes and so forth. So we ended up shooting the beginning of the film there. I think we had to go back about 5 times because I kept chickening out half the time, expecting rangers to shut us down. So I think we would kind of shoot a bit of stuff and take off, and then realize we'd gotten away with it, look at the footage and realize I really didn't have what I needed. So we'd go back, and then we'd go back again. And then it was a day for the Land Rover. I think we even tried taking some of the effects demon stuff with us, and it was windy and it looked kind of stupid. But yeah, it once again, it opened the movie up. I was me, doing the beginning of The Exorcist, basically, with the demon in the desert. And but it was kind of nice to begin in a completely exotic location and not begin on a street somewhere. And, we cheated it, and I think the widescreen frame and the dunes, sold it. Yeah, Robert Aganis, who was our DOP, I met him years ago when I used to go to parties, when we were talking about film and all that sort of thing. They were kind of like, local people in the industry. And Rob had mentioned that he'd worked on Predator as a Steadicam guy. So he had lots of stories that he would regale us about working with Carl Weathers and Arnold Schwarzenegger and so forth. And he was like, oh my God, you worked on this huge film for Don McAlpine. And years later, when I was looking for a DOP for Blur, and I went to everybody, I still had his phone number, so I called him. I think he was going through a breakup at the time, but I think he liked the challenge of turning up on the weekends and shooting this feature. And he was just amazing. He was able to do everything. We would set the dolly up, he would pan, he would tilt, he would focus, he would literally do everything. And when you look at the film, you wouldn't think it was a guy doing that, just one guy. It would be someone else, myself or Ian, running around with a cable or whatever, but really he handled all of that. And he was very intuitive as well. He kept the movie real. I would sometimes say, hey, but how about a red light or a green light? And he would say, why? So I kind of in my head thought that he was the Gordon Willis to my Coppola. I would try these florid things and he would keep it real. But he was amazing. He was one of the great secret weapons that we had on that film. Weirdly enough, when I was thinking of Blur, and I thought, if we're going to do a horror movie, what do we do? We've got an apartment, so let's put a demon in an apartment with a woman, and that's an interesting thing to do for 100 minutes because we have no money. And there's a constant tension from the minute we introduce the demon to the end of the film. You want to know what happens to the woman, how's she going to get out of this and all that. And it turned out that 5 or 6 years beforehand, I'd gone to New York to the museum there, and the demon is in fact right there as a statue. And I took a photograph of this demon thinking that's really gnarly. And how weird that years and years later when I was searching the internet for a good-looking demon to put into Blur, I could never find something as weird as, that demon that I had seen in New York. And so we kind of modeled it off that. And I don't think we'll get into copyright problems because it's 5,000 years old or something like that. So I think we're okay. And, the Pazuzu demon in The Exorcist, I think, was a real demon as well, and they didn't get sued by the Pazuzu. But yeah, it was something that when you see it, it just looks weird because it really is that 5,000-year-old statue. And I thought, yeah, that's That's for us. Yeah, I think there was a time when we were doing Foley, and I was working with Stuart, and we had to do something with an enormous pane of glass. So I found an enormous pane of glass on the street, because that's what you do, you find things. And I brought it in here, and while we were tapping it, I think we were doing a sequence where she was trying to bang the window to get out of the place. I hit it to get the sound effect and smashed it and cut my hand and so forth. And that would be the second time I smashed a piece of glass. I remembered I found an earlier piece of glass and I moved it and it shattered into a million little pieces. So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful little stories about doing things on no money. But I remember one time, somehow I vividly remember when I was working on sound with Ian, and we'd gone to a studio just to get general noises. And after we'd finished for a couple of hours, we went outside to have a breath of fresh air. And that was when the summer, fires were happening, and it was like brown outside. It was just insane. We were right next to the airport, and you almost couldn't see the airport. And I just have this vivid memory of going outside for fresh air. And I was like, no, let's go back inside for fresh air. Yeah, so Simon cut the movie, and he'd worked on my first film and all the short films and everything I've done. So we were completely on the same page, and we would shoot on Saturdays, and then I would go over to Simon's on Sunday, give him the footage, see what he'd cut during the week, and he'd always pretty much nail it. There wasn't a lot of change. He knew what I wanted, and I didn't get a huge amount of coverage anyway. I mean, there was only one way the film could be cut, and I thought he did a lovely job. So I think it comes down to trust. I completely trusted him that he would be able to do that. And sound-wise, we discovered Crash Symphony, and again, they ended up being one of the great secret weapons of this whole movie. And we spent at least 2 years doing sound. Things slowed down a bit financially, never stopped, but we went in every Saturday and did half-day sessions and stuff. And we ADR'd, and then we did sound effects, and then we did music, and then we sort of had to shoehorn things in, and then there was mixing, and there was going into the booth with sound effects and doing feet and doing drawers opening and goodness knows what. And that was just one of the great pleasures working with Stuart on this film, just coming up with ways to do it, and just going in and piecing it together. It was a whole nother film, really. You shoot the film, then you do the sound, and it was a hugely enjoyable and very labour-intensive couple of years just doing the soundtrack. I'd never done a whole soundtrack from beginning to end myself. It had always been handed to other people to do stuff like that. But when you're involved with it, you realise, oh my goodness, it's a whole nother movie right here, a whole nother process. But yeah, they made it really good. We used the temp music, was The Shining and Blade Runner 2049 for the film. And that worked so beautifully with the images in the film that we went and discovered some music online that was copyright royalty free from these guys, and we had to pick pieces, but it was really good stuff, and it ended up really making the film. So we've really got to speak to these guys. They're overseas. I haven't met them. We just emailed each other and so forth. But the music is a whole thing with the story. The story. You take the music away, it's not a scary film anymore. And the same with The Shining. You take the music out of The Shining, and it's just people wandering around in a hotel. So it really had to be a soundscape in and of itself. I think it's not music per se. It's like a soundscape, kind of a soundtrack. Yeah.